Hi friends, today I've brought you a thriller and mystery movie full of surprising twists that keep coming one after another. The story begins with Peter and his wife Carol at their home. One night, Carol wakes up suddenly crying, and Peter tries to calm her down. Recently, they had lost their young daughter Evie in a road accident. Peter blamed himself for the tragedy, and both of them were still deeply hurt and unable to move on. The next morning, Peter gets ready and goes to his office. He works as a psychiatrist. His first patient of the day is Felix, an elderly man. Felix believes that it is still the year 1985. When Peter asks him who the current president is, Felix names the one from 1985. Peter understands that Felix is suffering from a type of amnesia where a person cannot remember new events and keeps living in the past. That evening, Peter visits his senior, Mr. Duncan. During their talk, Duncan asks about Peter's daughter Evie, and we see a flashback. About a year ago, Peter was walking with Evie on the footpath when she let go of his hand and ran ahead. Moments later, she was hit in an accident. Duncan asked Peter if something had distracted him before the accident. After thinking hard, Peter remembers that he had stopped to look at a toy shop just before it happened. The memory leaves him emotional. Life continues like this for a few days, with Peter meeting unusual patients. One day, a woman named Erica visits him. She talks about how people around her often ignore her, making her feel very low and lonely. Peter listens carefully. Later, when Peter's about to leave for home, a young girl walks into his office holding a doll. He asks her name and about her parents, but she stays silent. She then hands him a train pass with the name Elizabeth Valentine written on it. Peter suggests that if she can't speak, she could write down why she has come to see him. Elizabeth stares at the pencil, and strangely, it begins to move on its own, which frightens her. Peter quickly tells her not to be scared. It's just the vibration from a passing train. He gets up to close the window, but when he turns around, Elizabeth is gone. On the table, he finds a note where she has written only one thing: the number 12,787. The next day, when Peter arrives at his office, the first thing he notices is the same doll that belonged to Elizabeth, lying there as if it had been waiting for him. Curious and uneasy, he walks towards the cabinet and freezes. Elizabeth is standing there. Peter is shocked. How could she be here? He had locked the office the previous night, and yet somehow she was already inside. Elizabeth is quietly looking out of the window, but then without warning, she begins to gasp for air, clutching her throat as if she can't breathe. Within seconds, she collapses to the floor. Peter rushes to his desk, grabs his keys, and runs to get some medicine from a nearby shelf. But when he returns, she's gone. The room is empty, except for her doll, left behind like a silent witness. Still disturbed, Peter takes the doll to Mr. Duncan to ask if he knows anything. Duncan was the one who usually referred patients to him, so Peter assumes Elizabeth must have come through him. But Duncan shakes his head. He has never sent a patient named Elizabeth. In fact, he tells Peter that maybe this girl doesn't exist at all. He suggests that Peter is imagining her, perhaps because he is projecting his daughter Evie onto her. After all, Elizabeth's initials, EV, are the same as Evie's. Peter is unsettled. Could Duncan be right? As he sits there thinking, Peter glances at Elizabeth's train pass, and suddenly she appears right in front of him. In the blink of an eye, her face changes. She's no longer Elizabeth. She's Evie, his daughter. But before Peter can react, she vanishes. Later, while traveling home by train, Peter unexpectedly comes across Erica, one of his patients. She looks directly at him and says something chilling. The reason she hasn't been able to end her life is because she's already dead. Shocked, Peter jumps off the train at the next station. But even as he walks away, he sees Erica's ghostly figure following him. The next day, still shaken, Peter searches public records for information about Erica. What he discovers leaves him speechless. Erica really is dead. And not just her, every single one of his patients, including Felix, has already died. Even stranger, they all died on the same date, 12th July 1987. That was the exact number Elizabeth had written for him, 12,787. Looking out of his office window, Peter sees a train passing by. Through its windows, he sees all his patients together, sitting quietly inside. These were the passengers, all victims. Peter rushes to see Duncan again, showing him the files and explaining everything. He says he's willing to believe this could all be in his head. Hallucinations, stress, grief. But one thing still doesn't add up. Duncan was the one who sent him all these patients. Then Peter's gaze shifts to the mirror in Duncan's office. What he sees stops his heart. There's no reflection of Duncan. He realizes the horrifying truth. Duncan himself is not real. With this revelation, Peter begins to dig deeper, researching each patient's background. Eventually, he finds the final, terrifying connection. Every single one of them came from the same village, his own home village, and they had all died together in the same tragedy, a terrible train accident. The next morning, Peter says goodbye to his wife and leaves for his hometown. the place where he grew up. He plans to stay there for a few days, hoping to find some answers. When he arrives, he meets his father, William. Their relationship has never been warm. Peter has always felt that his father was too absorbed in his own world, leaving little time or attention for his family. Later, Peter walks into his old bedroom, a place filled with memories from his childhood. He looks around, touching old objects, feeling the weight of the years. Then, tucked away among his belongings, he finds an old newspaper from the year 1987. As he begins to read it, his face turns pale. Something in it shakes him deeply. That evening, Peter heads to a local bar, where he runs into his childhood friend, Barry. The two are surprised and happy to see each other after so many years. They talk, catching up on life. Peter shares the sad news about his daughter's recent death, and Barry expresses his sympathy. But then Peter says something that changes the mood completely. He suggests that everything happening to him now might be connected to something they had hidden from the police years ago. Barry's expression hardens. He angrily reminds Peter that they had made a promise never to speak about that incident again. He demands to know why Peter has suddenly shown up after so many years, talking about ghosts and guilt. Peter explains that he has been seeing the spirits of dead people lately, and that the guilt has been eating him alive. Barry doesn't believe him. Frustrated, he leaves the bar. Left alone, Peter decides to go to the railway tracks. As he stands there, memories rush back, and a flashback begins. We see Peter and Barry as 14-year-old boys, wandering through the forest near the tracks. While playing, they hear the distant rumble of a train. Then they spot something alarming, a train cycle, a maintenance vehicle, left on the tracks. Realizing the danger, they panic and run to remove it, but they are too late. The train crashes and the scene fades to the next day's newspaper headline: 47 people dead in the accident. As young Peter stares at the wreckage, we, the viewers, see the faces of the passengers. Shockingly, they are the same people who are now his patients: Felix, Erica, and others. The flashback ends and we return to the present. Peter is walking back when Elizabeth suddenly appears in front of him. Before he can react, Felix lunges at him, trying to attack. Peter fights back and manages to escape. Shaken, he heads home. But instead of resting, he makes a decision. He must make things right. The next day, he goes to the police station and meets an officer named Barbara. He tells her the entire story of the accident, but he leaves out Barry's name, not wanting to involve his friend. Barbara listens carefully and then tells Peter that since the accident happened 20 years ago, and it was unintentional, he may not face any legal punishment. Still, the story clearly affects her. After Peter leaves her office, Barbara sits alone, crying quietly. It is then that Peter notices something on Barbara's desk, a photograph. In that moment, it all clicks. Erica, one of his ghostly patients, was Barbara's mother. She had died in the same train accident. That's why Barbara was so emotional. Peter apologizes to her sincerely. Barbara tells him she will file an official report soon. Relieved, Peter thinks that now, after confessing, he can finally find some peace. But that night, as soon as he comes home, he hears a faint humming, Elizabeth's voice. Following the sound, he opens his cupboard to check. Suddenly, the cupboard door slams shut from the outside. Trapped in the dark, Peter barely has time to react before Elizabeth's shadowy figure attacks him from inside. He struggles, but she overpowers him, and everything fades to black as Peter collapses unconscious. After some time, Peter slowly opens his eyes. He finds himself no longer alone. Mr. Duncan is standing in front of him again. Peter, still shaken, tells Duncan, "I've already told the police everything I remember. That means all these trapped souls should be free now." But Duncan shakes his head. "No, Peter, you still haven't remembered the real truth about that night. There's more. Your mind is still hiding it from you." Peter frowns, confused. Duncan continues, "Think about it. A massive train couldn't have crashed just because of two small bicycles left on the track. Something else happened. And Peter, you still don't even know how your own daughter really died." These words hit Peter hard. Suddenly, a new memory surfaces. He sees himself walking with Evie one day. As they pass a shop, Peter's attention is caught by a miniature toy train set displayed inside. A small toy station with tiny tracks and a train moving along it. The sight triggers something in his mind. While he's distracted, Evie lets go of his hand and runs off. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Barbara continues her investigation into the 1987 train disaster. While searching through the old files, she finds a folder full of accident reports and photographs. One picture makes her pause. It shows a much younger Peter standing at the accident site, right next to his father, William. The next morning, Peter returns to the railway tracks, determined to force the truth out of his own mind. Slowly, the memory starts coming back. That night, it wasn't just the bicycles. He remembers seeing someone pull the lever inside the train's control room, causing the disaster. Following the memory, Peter makes his way to the control room. But when he steps inside, his stomach drops. Barry is there. Only Barry is dead. He had taken his own life. Seeing this fills Peter with sadness and regret. Peter quickly calls Barbara and tells her everything. When the police arrive, Peter confesses that Barry was also involved that night. While searching the control room, the police find a school badge. This discovery makes Peter even more restless. What exactly happened that night? Peter takes out the old newspaper clipping again, but this time he notices the other side. There's an article about a missing girl, Elizabeth Valentine, the same Elizabeth who had come to his clinic. Until now, Peter had believed she was one of the victims who died in the train crash. But the article says she went missing before the accident. More flashes return. That night, he had seen Elizabeth running through the forest as if she was fleeing from someone. Peter immediately tells Barbara that Elizabeth didn't die in the train crash. She died before it happened. Barbara stares at him and asks how he could possibly know that. Peter hesitates, then tells her the truth. He can see the spirits of everyone who died in that train accident. Barbara doesn't believe him, so Peter shares personal details about her mother, Erica, things only Barbara would know. Hearing this shakes her deeply, but instead of accepting it, she grows upset and orders Peter to leave the police station. Peter walks out, feeling defeated, but when he gets into his car, he freezes. Elizabeth's doll is sitting on the seat beside him. Taking it as a sign, he makes a decision. He drives straight to the same forest where, years ago, he had seen Elizabeth. Once there, he begins calling out her name, asking her to show him the truth of what really happened that night. After a long silence, the cold air shifts. Elizabeth's spirit appears before him, her pale figure glowing in the darkness. She looks at him silently, then turns and motions for him to follow her. Meanwhile, at the police station, Barbara continues digging into Elizabeth Valentine's case file. She discovers that Elizabeth had gone missing from her school before the train accident. The school badge found at the control room belonged to her. Barbara reads further and learns something unsettling. William, Peter's father, had been the police officer in charge of investigating Elizabeth's disappearance. But in the official report, the cause of her death was never recorded. That gap in the file makes Barbara suspicious. Determined to get answers, Barbara visits William in person. She explains that she's reopening the investigation into the 1987 train accident. She points out that it's nearly impossible for a train to derail because of two bicycles alone. She also tells him her theory that Elizabeth was already missing before the crash, and she may have been inside the railway control room where her badge was found. At first, William tries to stay calm, but Barbara notices his discomfort. Then he says he doesn't remember much about Elizabeth, only that on the night of the accident, he rushed straight from the police station to the crash site. Barbara immediately catches the flaw in his story. "That's impossible," she says. "When the crash happened, all the routes to the scene were blocked. No one could get there quickly unless they were already there." William goes silent. The tension in the room rises. He offers Barbara some coffee, but she refuses. Quietly, she reaches for her gun, sensing danger. But before she can react, William suddenly strikes her on the head, knocking her unconscious. At the same time, Peter is in the forest, following Elizabeth's ghost. She leads him to the old railway control room. As he steps inside, the scene shifts into a flashback. Young Peter is there, 14 years old, hiding in the shadows. He sees Elizabeth running desperately through the forest trying to escape someone's car. Moments later, a scream pierces the night. Curious and worried, Peter follows the sound to the control room, and then the horrifying truth comes out. It was his father, William, who had kidnapped Elizabeth. Inside the control room, William was trying to force himself on her. In a desperate attempt to get away, Elizabeth pulled the lever, switching the track and causing the train to derail. The crash killed everyone on board. Peter watches in shock as the tragedy unfolds. But it doesn't end there. William strangles Elizabeth to death, then carries her body to the wreckage. He places her among the crash victims, so it would appear she died in the accident. He even prevented an autopsy, knowing it would reveal she had been strangled, not injured in the crash. The young Peter saw everything. The trauma was so severe that his mind blocked it out completely. He developed the same type of memory loss he once diagnosed in his patient Felix, where the brain erases certain painful events. This was why Peter had never remembered what truly happened that night. Back in the present, William drags the unconscious Barbara into an old train coach. He plans to kill her, just as he killed Elizabeth. But before he can act, Peter arrives and confronts him. Peter pleads with his father to surrender to the police, even calling Barbara's phone to let her know where he is. But when the ringtone echoes from inside the train car, Peter realizes with horror that Barbara is in there with him. He rushes toward the coach, but William blocks his path. A violent fight breaks out between father and son. Peter struggles, trying to overpower William, but William is strong and fueled by desperation. Finally, William strikes Peter hard on the head. Darkness floods Peter's vision, and he collapses unconscious, just as he had as a boy all those years ago. The next morning, William decides he is going to kill both Peter and Barbara. Peter is sitting in the back seat of the car, while Barbara is locked inside the trunk. As they are driving, William suddenly sees the ghost of Elizabeth standing in front of the car. Shocked, he loses control of the vehicle. The car swerves wildly, Peter is thrown out from the back seat, and the car slides forward until it gets stuck right in the middle of a railway track. At that moment, the sound of a loud train horn fills the air. A train is racing toward them at high speed. Panicking, William tries to get out of the car, but strangely, all the doors lock by themselves. Peter slowly regains consciousness, notices William's gun lying nearby, and quickly grabs it. He fires at the trunk's lock, and the lid finally opens. Barbara struggles to climb out, barely managing to escape. William, on the other hand, begins to crawl out through the shattered front windshield. But before he can get away, Elizabeth's ghost suddenly appears and drags him back inside. Within seconds, the speeding train crashes into the car, flipping it over and killing William instantly. As the chaos settles, Peter witnesses something strange. He sees the spirits of all the trapped passengers finally being freed. Among them is Elizabeth, who looks at peace as she disappears into the afterlife. Peter then returns home, feeling a sense of relief for the first time in a long while. There, he sees the spirit of his daughter, Evie, smiling at him. She says a final goodbye before fading away. With that, Peter is finally able to let go of the past. He starts a fresh life with his wife, and the movie comes to an end. In the final explanation, we learn that Mr. Duncan is not a real person at all. He represents Peter's own mind, trying to unlock forgotten memories from his past. After losing Evie, Peter went through the same emotional shock he had experienced as a child. Back then, there was a tragic train accident that he had always believed was his fault. In his mind, he linked that childhood tragedy to Evie's death, blaming himself for both events. This guilt caused him to fall into deep depression, and it was during this period that he began seeing ghosts. Over time, Peter's mind leads him back to the truth about his childhood trauma. He finally realizes that neither he nor his friend Barry was to blame for what happened. By the end, Barry is killed under mysterious circumstances. The movie doesn't give many details about Barry's death, but it is hinted that Barry might have known William's dark secrets. Some even believe that William may have been the one who killed Barry. That's the final twist of the story. Dark, emotional, and haunting. I'll meet you in the next video. Until then, bye.